各位好，我们的讲座马上就要开始了，请各位落座，谢谢。好的，各位同学下午好，欢迎参加黄廷芳信和大师讲堂系列讲座。今天我们非常荣幸邀请到国际建筑大师，同时也是本校校园的设计师严迅奇博士担任本次活动的主讲嘉宾。Today we are truly honored to welcome Dr. Rocco Yim, world-renowned architect and then the designer of our campus as our guest speaker for today's Wang Tingfang Sino Presidential Distinguished Lecturer. 严博士是当代建筑界的领军人物，擅长将地域文化与现代建筑技术相结合，为香港及内地城市打造独特的地标建筑。他的作品曾4度入围威尼斯建筑双年展，并荣获世界建筑节大奖、联合国教科文组织文化遗产保护奖等多项国际殊荣。Dr. Yim is a leading figure in contemporary architecture, celebrated for integrating regional culture with modern construction techniques and for creating distinctive landmarks in Hong Kong and mainland China. His projects have been featured 4 times at the Venice Biennale of Architecture and have received major international accolades, including the World Architecture Festival Award and the UNESCO Asian Pacific Awards for Cultural Heritage Conservation. 今天严博士将以文化重联为主题，分享他的建筑理念，探讨建筑如何促进文化的传承和创新。请各位注意，今天的演讲是主要以英文为主。Today, Dr. Yim will deliver a lecture titled Cultures Reconnected, sharing his architectural philosophy and exploring how architecture can foster both cultural continuity and innovation. 首先我们有请我们的署理校长张珍女士代表学院向严博士颁授感谢状，有请2位上台，谢谢。好的，谢谢2位，请2位回座。我们首先拍一张大合照，请各位望向大会的摄影师。我也过去拍。那请让我们再次用最热烈的掌声邀请严博士上台，为大家讲解文化重联。
Thanks, Ellen, for that lengthy introduction. Reconnecting Cultures, the title of today's talk. But behind the title really is a more pertinent question. What exactly is the essence of architecture? Right? Now, a lot of people, especially architects, Is it okay?
Yeah, so that we can actually capture.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, even I designed this building. I don't know how to operate. So who am I to talk about the essence of architecture? But seriously, quite a number of you here are or will be architects, I understand. And so you will tell me that architecture is an art. You're right, but not 100% right. Someone will say architecture is all about innovative ideas, new forms and spaces, to attract people. Again, you are right, but not 100% right. Although I have to say that as architects, as every other architect, we are also guilty in wanting to do something different as pieces of work. Okay? So, this is not my fault now.
Perhaps the keyboard. Just scroll up the keyboard.
Where is the key? Okay.
Yeah, that's easy. Yeah.
Yep.
呢個係嗰個我根本係擴充嗰部啊嘛，但係佢因為呢個飛咗 share screen 嘅咋，呢個要擴充嗰部。
Okay. So in 2000, we did a pavilion in Berlin, which actually uses traditional Oriental culture or Hong Kong culture, the use of bamboo, to erect a structure that is in dialogue with a modernist monument, the House of World Cultures. In 2005, we designed a villa in Shanghai, noted not for its opulent finishes or opulent forms, but noted for its opulent spatial configuration. In 2010, we designed the Guangdong Museum, which doesn't really look like a building, and is meant to be an object. In 2010, we designed I Square in Hong Kong, a shopping center that extends all the way up to 28 stories. 2011, we designed the Hong Kong government headquarters, which is noted for the fact that a public garden actually penetrates through the complex, despite all the security and safety concerns that government headquarters usually post. In 2016, of course, we designed this building, which is not just a building, it's an entire campus, all happening within one building. In 2024, which is last year, we just completed a cultural center, a performing arts center, which unlike usually white elephants, which are usually what happens to performing arts centers, this will be, hopefully, when it's finished, embedded in the community and very much a part of the city fabric. In 2025, just this year, we designed a new school, secondary and primary school. But the only comment that we have received, and this is what is preventing us as yet from going forward, is that the government thought it doesn't look like a school. Now, as I mentioned, like many other architects, we're also guilty of wanting to do things which looks different and feels different. But I would be the first to point out that being different is not a design philosophy. Just trying to be different isn't the essence of architecture. Because among all art forms, architecture is the only one that is tied to a place and to its time. And in order for architecture to be relevant, it needs to embrace cultures across times and cultures that are related to contemporary urban conditions. And what are these? Shapes, skins are at best only a part of architecture. They're not the essence. What are the essences are both cultures that relate to our past, heritage, spatiality, community, and those that relate to our present, the culture of density, connectivity, and diversity. Now, when we talk about heritage, we have to understand that we should take inspiration from heritage. But at the same time, we should not be bound by heritage. And also, we have to understand that as architects, heritage doesn't come just in the form of traditional buildings. It's not just daogongs and temples and things. Heritage has to do with objects, structure, of course, landscape, and lifestyle. And heritage, the inspiration we take from heritage, should just be the beginning that inspires us. But then we should pursue the architectural evolution based on all the contemporary considerations of form, use, context, material, technology, and then to be evolved to something which is relevant to our times. So that is the essence of embodying culture from heritage as an inspiration, as a beginning, not necessarily as the end product. In our design for the Guangdong Museum, the inspiration is from a treasure box. Treasure boxes that our ancestors used to collect, to place objects of treasure inside. But the box itself is often as valuable as the objects inside. And the box itself is itself a work of art. So by elevating a box slightly above an undulating landscape and creating a fenestration that relates, of course, to the interior requirements of the space, it creates actually a sense of mystique. It creates this sense of precision and craftsmanship that entices you to go inside and explore the layering of the spaces that unfolds. And by raising the box above the ground, it also forms a gray space for people to enjoy as a gray space between the exterior and the interior of the museum. So the intrigue of the spatial layering on the inside, punctuations in the external envelope to allow views out to different directions. Does it look like a treasure box at the end of the day? It doesn't matter. It's the idea that we are creating something that allures, that makes a reference to the essence of some of the traditional objects that our ancestors possessed. That is the idea. In the end, it is just a modern museum with all the functions of a modern museum satisfied and evolved. The Yunnan Museum also takes inspiration from our heritage, and in this case is the landscape and the ambience of the place, which is Kunming. The bronze wares, the colorful costumes of the minority races, the landscape, especially that famous landscape in this immediate neighborhood, the Shilin, the stone forest. Noted both for its form and texture, but also for this spatial configuration, that there are narrow spaces through the rock forest that suddenly opens up into green, expansive spaces on the inside, creating spatial surprises that draws you in. So the facade, with both solids and slits of openings that you see from the inside out, and also the main entrance, you pass through a narrow space, and then suddenly it opens up into another world. A world which is flooded with natural light, teeming with greenery, enabling the atrium to be naturally ventilated for most times of the year, and the facade reflecting sunlight and, of course, artificial light in different conditions of the weather to present different faces to the surroundings, rather like a natural edifice. The Bao'an Canal village in Hainan takes inspiration from the lifestyle of families or settlement in the past in central China, the water villages, where the water courses is actually the center of life for transport, for washing, for gathering, for different types of activities. Now, this is, of course, the 20th century, a 20th century when this was designed and built. So, but the canals still acts as the main artery for the development, which is a series of holiday houses and hotel bungalows. So we have houses that are grouped around different courtyards along the canals, which are landing grounds for the water transport, places where people used to wash or to wash and what else do they do? Drinking, yeah, maybe. But today is really for activities. You know, weekend vendors and activities, organized activities, and for daily gathering spaces for transport. And some of these houses have direct access with their own piers. So it's a natural feature that winds through the community, offering a symbiosis of the man-made and the natural element. Space is also an important element in our heritage, especially in architecture. But space in the past is not just a phenomenon. It's a tool. It's a tool to organize families where different generations are organized in a series of clusters of courtyards. 尊卑有別, you know, from seniorities to the younger generation and to guests and so forth. Space is also a tool to create spatial surprises and spatial aspirations in public buildings, like in Wugong or the temple compounds, where you proceed from the entrance all the way to the main building and to the back across a series of courtyards. In the process, it heightens your sense of anticipation and appreciation and respect. Space is also comes in a very ambiguous form, neither indoor nor outdoor. Gray spaces that are multifunctional, like corridors, like verandas, to break down the barrier between sometimes the public realm and the private realm. In the villa that we designed in Shanghai, is a house based on a special spatial configuration, where we have the main axis, where the main rooms, the living and dining, are located. And then along one side is the corridor where all the rooms, the bedrooms, are located. The guest room, the master bedroom, the children's room, grandfather's rooms, each with their own courtyards. So it's a house with a spatial configuration that takes inspiration from what our ancestors did in the past, but is geared to a contemporary Chinese family. There will no longer be 2 or 3 wives, of course, just husband and wife, but then the children will be on one side, and usually no more than 2 children, even today. And very often grandparents would like to come and stay for a long time, so there would be the guest bedrooms. Now, all these different family spaces would have their own private confines. So members could socialize, and also they could be kept to their own if they prefer to be private, so that grandparents could be encouraged to stay as long as possible, and children could be encouraged to stay as long as possible with their parents before they move out. So it's geared to a contemporary, middle-aged, well, maybe slightly more than middle-income Chinese family. But it's still based on the usage of space to organize a family structure. So this is the entrance courtyard through a pond, and you see through the living and the dining room. And along one side of the corridor, it leads to different bedrooms. And each bedroom has their own private courtyard for their own activities. And as you can see, all the materials are quite basic, in a way very frugal. No marble, no glittering bronze or gold-plated elements. It's just the richness of space that gives us its what we call 豪宅 feel. The school I just mentioned in Guangzhou is also an exercise in organizing space in such a way that brings about a sense of community to the whole school. The playground is to one side, but the building on the left-hand side actually houses dormitories at the top, because above 24 meters from the floor, you are not allowed to have classrooms. But all the classrooms and function rooms, exhibition, conference, so forth, are all located at the base. And they're organized into a series of courtyards. The entrance, the first courtyard, the second courtyard, each with a different ambience. So just to bring about the sense of community for the whole school, and a different ambience for different spaces for different activities. So dormitories above, classrooms and public facilities at the base, and you enter by stepping slightly up so that you reach the sports field at the left-hand side, beneath which are all the large-scale indoor sports facilities. So the entrance, the middle courtyard, and the third courtyard. And the view from different angles. So it's the use of space to bring about a sense of community, which is very much like what we have done here. The use of spatial configurations and the creation of places, or the bringing about of place making with the correct ambience and scale to encourage interaction and exchange among the student community. Gray space is also something we try to introduce, especially in buildings in China, which used to be strictly confined between what is inside, what is outside, with a boundary. That's usually what was done. Now, in this museum in Shenzhen, a small one, in the middle of a community, which is where the theme is design and creative industries. This is a little museum dedicated to design. The metaphor is one of energy, exploding energy for contemporary Chinese design, breaking out of the box. But in the process, we actually created spaces that are neither indoor nor outdoor, that diffuse the boundary between what is the building and what is the public realm. And these spaces would be very flexible and could be used for different functions, such as exhibitions. So the use of gray space, something that we borrowed from our traditional vernacular to serve modern needs, especially when we want, in cases like buildings related to design, more spontaneity, more creative use, and more undesigned interaction between users and outsiders. I mentioned before that space can be configured to bring about the sense of community. Now, this is again something that we learn from our past. In buildings like Tulao, or walled villages, the use of architecture to create a sense of community has long been used by our ancestors. But in the old days, the community really relates to families, clans, and the purpose of creating this community, I believe, is more for protection and sense of security. Now, that's no longer relevant today. Today, the sense of community is about exchange and interaction. And it's more relevant to certain building types like universities, cultural centers, cultural districts, which is why this college is designed with the belief that if we configured spaces and places with the correct mix of ambience and scale and activities, it will bring about a much stronger sense of community. I don't have to explain how this building works. Suffice to say that within a very small piece of land, we need to integrate everything. It's born out of necessity. But it also brings about this merit of having a much integrated and, I don't know, hopefully, much closer knit community that students and staff could have a greater sense of belonging. So, you know, we are familiar with all these spaces. But it also actually reflects one other culture, which is about our contemporary urban condition, and that is the culture of density. Now, density used to be a dirty word. It brings to mind congestion, unhealthy living conditions, environmental shortcomings, gridlock. However, if density can be harnessed, it could actually lead to architecturally very creative typologies. It could lead to convenience, energy, rather than stagnation. It actually is giving the architects a chance to do something different. Once land becomes so premium, so valuable as a resources, that we are obliged to make the best use of it. But we do it by tempering the need for density with the care for the environment, like ventilation, lighting, like circulation, people flow. So one of such building type is I Square in Nathan Road. It used to be a hotel. So what we are asked to design is a commercial center, because this is a district in Hong Kong where retail activities is most needed. Maybe not today, but when we designed it. So we try to stack up commercial functions all the way up to the 25th floor and link them with both express and floor-to-floor escalators through a series of atria. So on Nathan Road, you see we stacked up 3 atria, one on top of the other. And each atrium is anchored or is geared to certain shop types. Boutique, luxury shops at the lower base, lifestyle shops in the center, and cinema complex at the top. And on the tower is a series of restaurants with the terraces looking at the skyline of Hong Kong. And it communicates with the neighborhood because it's not all indoors. And each of the atria has a view out to the bustling city around it as one goes through from one zone to the other. And at night, looking at it from the surrounding city, you are quite aware of what is going on the inside. So the need to capitalize on the use of land has forced us to adopt a solution that, first of all, creates a sense of orientation of where to go, and second, to bring about a communication between the inside and the city. So there is a constant dialogue between the users on the inside and the city on the outside. Another typology that we are forced to adopt is a building that brings into the same structure, rather like this building, different functions. In the site of the former Polytechnic staff housing, we have designed a school for the hotel management for the Hong Kong Polytechnic. We have designed keep the existing staff housing block. And then we have to put in an actual commercial hotel. They will be doing business. So we have the hotel at the very top, the staff quarter on the left-hand side overlooking a park, and then the teaching facilities of the School of Hotel Management at the base. While the staff housing is segregated from the rest of the building for privacy and security, the hotel block and the teaching block actually shares functions so that students could learn from real-life experience of how to run a hotel. And some of the facilities are actually run by students. So it's the atrium for the hotel. At the top, with the swimming pool with an obstructed view around, and then the hotel block at the very top. So these are examples of how we try to harness the requirement for dense development, but with concerns both for the environmental well-being of the different functions and how they are integrated so that there is synergy between some of them and total segregation between the others. But apart from the requirement to harness density or to make density works in a city like Hong Kong, we can't just deal with individual buildings. We have to deal with the relationship between buildings and neighborhoods. What makes our density work is not just the amount we put into individual lots, but it's how different buildings can relate to each other and how different fabrics of the city could be stitched together so that the working of the city could be improved. And in many instances, architecture is actually a tool to bring about how the different parts of the city could be connected in a way which is not just working from point A to point B, but is also encouraging different spatial experiences along the way to enrich your life, your commuting experience. Our public rim, which started as streets, steps, and then later on helped by the construction of footbridges, tunnels, decks, are actually all helping to realize the scenario where architecture is no longer isolated, but they're all interconnected. And sometimes when you design the architecture, you have this interconnectedness in mind so that you could facilitate the fluid flow of people through the architecture or around the architecture. The government headquarters is a very good example. Normally, they are just fenced off like a fortress. But situated in this prominent site, we believe that apart from just providing a public space, we should be using the public space to link up the inner city with the waterfront. Because before this was built, the waterfront was very inaccessible because of the constant reclamation and because of the fact that very few people have really cared about how people get access to the waterfront. It's usually through narrow footbridges and across wide express roadways. So what we do, instead of creating just an open space at the front and a building block at the back, as required by the original brief, we turned it into something whereby the buildings are placed on either side and the central is actually linked up by a green carpet, we called it. So our access to the main buildings are all from the side. The central portion is reserved for a park which is accessible 24 hours a day for the public, who could pass through in style without disturbing all the activities around it. So that is the essence, really, of this design. The symbolic meaning of the door being always open and so forth. Okay, that's another thing. But it's the urban contribution of this building, in my mind, that exemplifies what I said about using architecture to help the working of the city. So this main park, through it, through the gateway, descending gradually onto the waterfront, and because of the fact that it crosses the expressway at the first floor level and then walking slowly down the ramp all the way to the ground level at the waterfront, means that you always have a view of the harbor. And of course, it also becomes a place where art pieces could be installed or outside to emphasize this continuity of movement and space. The East Kowloon Cultural Center is actually a performing arts center. But it's unusual in that it is situated right in the center of an old district in Ngau Tau Kok. On the left side is the Kowloon Bay Railway MTR station. On the right-hand side is Tau Dai, which is the old housing estate. And then there are public housing further up the slope, and the market down on one side. So on the left-hand side, the ground floor is totally, in a way, lifeless, because there's a big expressway, and the MTR concourse is situated above ground. But on the right-hand side, we have the traditional shops, traditional market, pockets of open space, and then all the way up to Jordan Valley with the green spaces and the parks. So the Performing Arts Center, apart from fulfilling the brief of providing a large theater, a middle-sized theater, the light blue blocks on both sides, apart from providing all the other studios, black boxes, dance studios, rehearsal rooms, and so forth, we actually bring about a pedestrian network in the purple color from the MTR concourse above the road level, and then merging it with the lobbies and the promenades of the theater. So the public circulation takes place through and around the cultural center in purple, from above the road through the center, and then descending down onto the ground level pockets of plazas before crossing the road to the old housing estates. And then the audience who will be using the theaters or visiting the theaters is in red in the circulation. Normally, when there is no performances on, the commuters could travel all around and through the Performing Arts Center And on their way, they will see exhibitions, informal performances. They will go down onto the pockets of plazas for maybe weekend markets. But during performances, the foyers would be probably closed off, and the commuters would then use alternative routes, either going down first to the ground or going up, and then above the foyer they would be going across a new flyover to connect to Todai shopping arcade. So it's a three-dimensional network of both commuter traffic and user traffic that could be segregated at times, or that could be purposely intermingled at times, so that the whole center would not be dead. They would have life throughout the day and through the days of the week. And that's how we use the building, which is a cultural building, to bring about connectivity. So that the different fabrics from Kowloon Bay to Todai to Jordan Valley could then be stitched together. And walking or commuting daily would become a rewarding and celebrated experience. So essentially, the performance spaces are just boxes stacked in various locations. But the circulation network are all enclosed in a glazed structure with lots of natural light and visual communication with the neighborhood. This, of course, is the essence of the place, but the life of the center is actually happening all around it, like this main foyer. And these are some of the trial activities that has taken place over the last years. We created this image for presentation to a client. In reality, it is much messier. And frankly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Hopefully, this is just rumors, it will be opened by the end of this year. Don't tell people I said it. Now, another project where we have explored with the idea of improving connectivity of the city is our tender proposal for the Central Waterfront Site 3. Now, we didn't, or rather our client didn't get the job. Unfortunately, they lost a bit. But I thought it is a good example to show how we use this opportunity to improve further the connectivity of our city. Now, the development stretches from just beyond Cheetah Gardens on the left, all the way to the Star Ferry on the right. That is the south-north connection. But also from the east to the west, this is an opportunity to link up Tamar, City Hall, all the way to IFC in multi-levels as a network. So we try to combine street shops, traditional street shops, with high-end shopping arcade into one complex. So we have a series of linkages. The yellow linkage is all on grade. So from Cheetah Gardens on the left to Star Ferry on the right, you pass through a series of interconnected courtyards at grade. You have to cross roads sometimes through zebra crossings. And then the link in orange would be one level above, so that you walk uninterrupted by traffic all the way. But all the time, when you're walking on that deck, you have a look down onto different plazas. And the orange connection then extends westward, some on the same level, and others climbing up 2 levels, so they reaches actually the podium roof of IFC, another public open space, to improve its accessibility. And then, of course, at the top of the low block, the connectivity in blue happens on the roof, because the roof is another venue for public activities like exhibitions and leisure sports activities. So a series of courtyards, a landscape deck, and a sky deck. You go up from the MTR stations at the lower end onto a series of courtyards that leads you all the way to the waterfront. This, with the clock tower Star Ferry maintained. And you see the new Star Ferry at the very end, where the deck level connection, you see both on the right-hand side and left-hand side, you eventually connecting with the ground level plaza through an open-air theater. And this is the link to IFC and to IFC podium deck. Indoor shopping linked with outdoor shopping. So this is not only creating connectivity through the city fabric, it's also trying to blur the boundaries between different functions, between work, leisure, retail, and commuting. So the space will become much more flexible and probably much more attuned to the lifestyle of the 21st century, where you work, at the same time you shop, at the same time you relax, and at the same time you exercise. Back to a very small project, the new Chinese Museum Annex. It's also an exercise in using the architecture to improve the flow of students and staff through the CU campus. This is the section where you have the University Mall on the right-hand side. Next to it is the existing museum of the Chinese U. And then down the slope, you have the University Avenue. And on a daily basis, there are lots of people who commute from the University Avenue all the way to the University Mall. And at the moment, it's just a series of very boring slopes and steps and back of house lanes for people to travel. So by creating an extension, we're actually trying to solve a few things. How to create, of course, a visual symbol that symbolizes the reaching out of the museum to looking forward to the future. So create a block that juts out from the slope. At the same time, we therefore maintain beneath the cantilever block parts of the existing slope with the existing vegetation and trees, so that the feeling you drive along University Avenue, where greenery has always been on both sides, is maintained. That is the metaphor of a rock jutting out from a landscape with greenery beneath. This is Dai Jun's painting, 石下藏蔭. But this also serves a purpose, because by maintaining the main exhibition galleries above the slope on the same level as the existing galleries, number 3, existing galleries in the existing museum, we create a continuous exhibition space without people having to go up or down unnecessarily. By having elevated the new gallery space, which is 2, above the slope, we create a new space underneath, which is used for socializing or impromptu cultural activities and gatherings. And then we bring people, commuters, through a grand staircase up the slope and all the way up to the University Mall. And while you pass through these galleries, you're always in contact with different cultural activities that are being held either beneath in the flexible space or formal exhibitions that are arranged at the floors above. So that's just completed and open last month. The trees, hopefully, later on will grow, and that will be a continuation of the existing greenery all the way along University Drive. The main exhibition space is suspended above the slope, so to minimize touching the slope as much as possible. And by creating a space beneath the floating gallery, we have a space for flexible activities with a view looking out towards the most glamorous part of the scenery of the Chinese Zoo, in my view. So sitting here, you can sit out onto the balcony, and then you look out onto the unobstructed greenery, the valleys, all the way to the Shatin River. So the flexible space at the lower level, and then you go up the stairs. And then you reach the connecting point between the existing galleries on the left-hand side and the new gallery on the right-hand side, which is situated just midway between the two. So you go up half a level to the top and go up half a level to the lower level. And that is the main new exhibition space. Now, connectivity, of course, in Hong Kong can be easily very effective because of our very compact urban fabric. If we create a connection across the road, I mean, you could easily or with comfort commute that distance across the road. We have found from experience that it is much, much more difficult to do so in China because buildings are far apart, roads are wide, and the vehicle always takes precedence. But we do try. And in the Bo'an Cultural Complex, we create connectivity in a different way. The site is located in Bo'an, which is just north of Qinghai. It consists of a cultural center with 3 buildings, the library, youth center, and performing arts center. So what we do is create a sequence of buildings rather than one building, and each are separated by their own access, plazas and courtyards, so that as you travel from the city above, which is the main government building for Bo'an, you go through a series of open and close and open and close space, and that will bring you all the way to Qianhai Bay, the waterfront. So a series of buildings across both indoor and outdoor sequencing. And each of these courtyards in between the buildings would then be a connection to public buildings in the future. Already at the very base, at the very bottom, the new entertainment complex has already been completed. If you recall, that is the area where they have a new shopping center, a new Martin, a new ferry wheel. So you can see the series of buildings and the main Bảo An city center at the back. You can see part of the new commercial entertainment complex on the right. And then further back on the right, where you see the series of lawns, work has already actually started on an underground book city. So this is the library, the youth center, the performing arts center. Inside of the performing arts center, and already then you are at the edge of the bay. Night shows and light shows at nights with the crowd. As I mentioned, where the lawn is being shown on this slide, will be the site of a new underground book city. And that will be connected to the various plazas in between the three white blocks on the right. So it will become a well-connected public rim that would benefit the flow of people, and that would benefit the staging of various activities. A building where we designed in Chengdu, still under construction in final stages, also tries to connect different parts of this district through the architecture. It is separated into two lots, but we connect it by having a linear building on the left and then a series of individual pavilions on the right and a deck that links up the two parts of the city. We also try to break up the boundary of the indoor and the outdoor by creating apartments and office on the top, and then a whole youth activity zone at the base. And this is where young enterprises, in terms of studios, showrooms, shops, restaurants, activity rooms, will all be located. Because this is entirely a center meant for young people and upstart business. And by breaking purposely the envelope of the building, we try to merge the outdoor and the indoor so that there is, again, a blurring of the boundaries between what is public and what is private. We also try then to blur the boundary of the building with the surrounding city, encouraging a seamless flow of people from all directions. View of the inside. This is just the image. They are having, of course, difficulty in filling it at the moment, at this point in time. But this is all about youth enterprise. The exterior is more or less finished, and you can see the connectivity and the merging of spaces and the encouragement of free flow of functions and people across boundaries and across different fabrics of the city. And finally, the culture of diversity. Hong Kong, of course, has always been a meeting point. We all know that. It's becoming cliche to say it's a place where the East meets the West. But it's our embracing of diversity, meaning that we welcome anything as long as they work, as long as they help us to do whatever we want. That's the spirit that leads to this culture of diversity. And it doesn't just happen in architecture. It's in our food, like coffee and tea and being mixed together. Of course, is in the mixing of our shops, a traditional shop next to a high-class coffee shop. When we did our bamboo pavilion for the Berlin Hong Kong Festival, it's actually this diversity of influence that we try to embrace. We use bamboo because bamboo is famous for their use in Hong Kong, for being versatile, easy to assemble, easy to dismantle, easy to transport. You don't find such material anyway. Well, maybe in Southeast Asia. But the way that we put them together in scaffolding in our Tempe Theatre is legendary. So when we did this pavilion, all the bamboos were shipped to Berlin. They were constructed by a crew of bamboo workers that are being flown to Berlin. It's done all in 10 days. That's the time that they were allowed to do it. But the structure itself is meticulously engineered. It's designed by Arabs, the structure, and has to be approved by the Berlin authorities for everything. Structural integrity, fireproofing, inset, everything. And is actually being lashed together with traditional methods, plus more high-tech engineering devices, like tension wires. And it forms a good visual counterpoint. The temporality, the lightweightness, with the solidity and the permanence and the monumentality of the Berlin building behind. Back in Hong Kong, later on, a few years later, we also did this pavilion just outside the Hong Kong Museum of Art. Similar idea. So it's the use of diverse materials and methods with the requirements of different locations that combined to make this, in a way, a hybrid element that is suited for its use. Likewise, we did an installation in Italy 2 years ago called Dancing Forest. It's erected in a place called Art Cella, which is an art district in the middle of the mountains in central Italy, not far from the city of Verona. Already a series of artists and architects like Ritchie and Dimura and Kenko Kuma have already done sculptural pieces there. When we visited the site, we found that the location is really famous for all the local trees. It's the Alpina larch, all the trees that are grown on the mountain hills. But when we arrived, unfortunately, or rather for us, it's fortunately, it's right after a big storm. And we have broken branches, broken trunks all over the sites, which is a very sad sight. So our idea is to create an installation that celebrates the broken trunks. But broken trunks that we assemble together and standing together again to give it new life as an expression. And it also allows us to create not just a thing to look at, but it's a spatial structure to pass through and experience. So after completion, they have held parties there, children running about, blind people feeling their way through the matrix, and professional dancers staging new shows using the spatial matrix as a backdrop, as a background. So again, is the diverse use of materials and thinking and methods that create something suited for its place and its purpose. But then back to Hong Kong now, of course. The West Kowloon Cultural District is a good example of expressing diversity. Why so? Well, first of all, it's the site, it's the location. A reclaimed site at the Western Kowloon. Across the harbor, we have the skyline of Hong Kong and the many different visual icons like IFC and Tamar and so forth. To the north is another commercial landmark, the ICC and the West Kowloon Airport Railway Station. To the east is one of our more famous green lung, Kowloon Park, actually on top of a hill. But more excitingly, really, is Old Kowloon. All the alleyways and streets and neons and shops and, you know, in the different network in the old city. And of course, there's always this memory of our diverse public domain. Steps, market streets, alleys. But we were inspired actually by this famous painting, the Qingming Sanhuotou, by the fact that what it celebrates is really something to explore. It's not something that you could see all at once. That is, or that should be, the essence of a cultural district. It's an area to explore. So what we do is try to organize the district into 3 layers. The green terrain next to the waterfront, the city link at the top, and then the cultural link in the center where all the cultural facilities are located. But importantly, we bring in the fabric or the scale or the texture of the existing street grids in the old Kowloon, overlaid it onto the district, and orientate them in such a way that each of these alleys or streets is centered on one landmark across the harbor. So each of these alleys has, at the end of the vista, an important architectural landmark on Hong Kong Island. But more importantly, or the most important thing, we have a series of spatial network combining plazas, alleys, avenues, squares, steps, whose purpose really is to create a setting where cultural institutions in future could create a dialogue across them. That, apart from providing activity space, is really the main purpose of open spaces like this. They create an opportunity for buildings around it which are to be designed in the future to have a dialogue, because they would provide a common source where buildings could speak to it. Because otherwise, with so many of these so-called master plans, you end up with a series of buildings all by themselves, like an expo. And it also creates a setting where diverse functions could coexist without ignoring one another. So in our mind, the master plan is such that, for instance, CG Center would be next to a modern medium-sized theater. M+ would be next or speaking to a concert hall across the square. And a series of theaters rearranged, flanking both sides of a grand steps leading down to the waterfront. Now, the latest master plan, of course, is something quite, well, not dissimilar. There are elements in it, like this east-west avenue, which will be constructed, and all these alleyways that lead to the waterfront will still be there. Our main concern is what happens at the western end, because such a long district that there has to be something important on the western end so that people could go there from the east entrance. And the Palace Museum gives us this opportunity. So from day one, we thought that the western end would be the correct and ideal place for a Palace Museum. So that with the CG Center at the east, the Palace Museum on the west, it anchors both the traditional Chinese performing arts and traditional Chinese visual arts. And then in between will be the M+ and the Lyric Theater and the opera and concert hall and all the rest. So that's the rationale behind the location. It also gives us an opportunity of using the public space in front of the Hong Kong Palace Museum to merge with the park, so that we have a three-dimensional landscape element, not just something flat on the ground. Now, of course, at the moment, you don't read any of this yet, but hopefully it will come on stream. But because of the restrictions of the original master plan, we have to limit the footprint of the building to a very compact footprint, because so that we could leave sufficient open space as required by law still to take place. So you can see the museum is a very compact building. It therefore has to rise up 6 stories, well, 5 stories from the raised deck. But this is very Hong Kong, right? This is about culture of density. And also, this location has a very different context on either side. The waterfront on one side, Kowloon, the new urban development on the east side, and then a park on the south side, and Hong Kong Island on the south side. So all this is very Hong Kong. So this design is about contemporary urban culture. But at the same time, because it's the Palace Museum, so we have to reflect traditional visual culture as well as traditional spatial culture. Again, it's taking inspiration from the past. We do not create the building so that it could look like a vase or a thing or whatever, no. But we just want to capture the attributes like the majesty, the serenity, the balance, the poise, the colors and textures, and the subtlety of the glamour. Looking at it, we wouldn't say it's a museum of modern art. We wouldn't say it's a science museum. It doesn't matter what you think it looks like, as long as it reminds you of the essence of our traditional visual culture. But more importantly, it's about incorporating traditional spatial culture, more particularly the phenomena of layering, the phenomena of sequencing that you find in our landscape, in our painting and calligraphy, and of course, in our traditional architecture. As in the Forbidden City, where the progression of space along a south-north axis is actually the main attractions that leads you to go in from Tiananmen all the way to Jingshan. Now, of course, being so compact, we can't have a horizontal sequencing of space. So therefore, we stacked up 3 atria, one on top of the other, to lead people upwards. But being situated in this context with different contexts on either side, the lower atrium is oriented towards the east to face the main entrance to the cultural district. This mid-level atrium is oriented towards the south to have a view of the Hong Kong island skyline. And the upper atrium is oriented towards the west to look at Lantau and maybe our future development. So you go in, and there's always something that captures your attention or imagination at the top to lead you upwards. And then you have a 90-degree rotation in the visual axis from looking towards the east at the entrance to looking at the south, and then up again. And then you look at Lantau at the very top. So the interior captures this phenomena of 步移景遷, 步而景遷. Shifting locations give you shifting vistas, a very traditional Chinese landscaping concept. And then the interflow of lights and shadows. But more importantly is the juxtaposition of time and space. You go into one gallery looking at centuries-old artifacts, and then you're suddenly out onto the south atrium, and you look at the skyline of Hong Kong. You look at comparison of traditional Western and Chinese art in the 18th century at the top atrium, and then you go and you look at Lantau, our future. So this juxtaposition of our past and our present and our future would make the museum as something that you don't just come to look at things of beauty. It's a place you come to be inspired and provoked. So that, in my view, would be the most important essence, really, of the architecture. So, architecture is never just about forms and skins. In order for architecture to be of sustainable value, it has to take inspiration from our past cultures, and it has to be embodying cultures from our present, so that it could be anchored both to its place and its time. Thank you. If you have time, if you have time. Okay.
Well, thank you, Dr. Yim, for the very inspirational speech. Myself learned a lot, even as an outsider of the architecture, and I hope you guys will learn much better than me. And we have maybe like 10 minutes for the Q&A session. If you guys have any question to Dr. Yim. Well, I guess our professors are more interested in.
Is this working? Yes, it is. Many years ago, I teach a lecture series here on the history of Western architecture, and I asked you, a long time ago, do your clients ask you to put classical details on your buildings? And you said, David, all the time. So my question is, how have clients changed over the past 10 years or so? What are their changing expectations, do you think? Thank you.
It's a dangerous question. I think clients haven't really changed in essence. They just essentially try to follow the trend. 20 years ago, you asked me that question, is it 20 years ago? You mentioned classical details. But we were then still in the middle of this postmodern craziness, right? So clients expect us to put in false pediments and columns and porticos because they thought that was the trend. And then there was a period when they got away from that. And they're after something maybe more sensible. They even embrace minimalism. And lately, they caught on another trend, which is about Instagrammable, Instagrammability. I don't know whether there's such a word. Meaning, if people like to take pictures in various corners, and if you tell them that's where we would expect young people to gather for a photo or two, they would go along. So I think they would like to stay with the trend. But they, well, maybe some of them do. Some of them, they don't really have a clear understanding of what trend that should be, and whether it would be short-lived or whether it would have sustainable value.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yim. I also start my question from the phrase many years ago, almost 20 years ago when I was still a very small kid. You had a lecture in Hong Kong U, which something you said really enlightened me. Maybe not very accurate, but correct me if I misunderstood. You said in Hong Kong, we usually try to weaken the boundary and try to integrate public and private, the two different types of people. But in other places, such as in mainland China, maybe the mindset would be totally different. And what do you think about in nowadays, whether this statement is still valid or even would it be reversed?
I think it has improved a lot in China in recent years in two aspects. One is that they started to appreciate the scale of the urban fabric, i.e., they started to understand that if we have a more compact and richer urban fabric like Hong Kong's, it actually is beneficial both to the flow of people and to the activities that could be generated in between buildings. Now, I say this maybe not for all cities, right? Certainly Shenzhen and to say Guangzhou. They started to appreciate this. And when they started to adopt a more compact and richer urban fabric, then they would feel that the advantages of breaking down boundaries between the inside and the outside, between one property and the other one, would be correspondingly a good idea. So I think that is the direction that they are heading towards. The only thing is, there have been, for so many years, the fabric which has already been fixed. You can't narrow down the road now, right? And you can't put buildings closer together now, once they have been erected. So those are the obstacles that they might have to look to overcome. But certainly it is changing in that direction.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yim. It's always a delight to listen to your presentations. Thank you for all your contributions to the RIBA. You're one of our most favorite architects, if I may say in public. My question is related to the way you create spaces. I learned a lot from your presentation. You know, as academics, we always learn from the practitioners. The question is related to, when it comes to space, creating spaces, your designs are very, very generous with the spaces. They're like multiple heights and creating vibrant spaces. The question is, how do you convince clients when it comes to, particularly in retail, commercial projects? It's about GFA, it's about a sellable space. That's one question. The second one, the sustainability aspect or the regulatory aspects of fire protection, fire safety, or energy performance of buildings. Yeah, thank you.
Well, two aspects. I think I have been very careful to create spaces which feel generous. But in fact, in many instances, are quite compact. Meaning that I would like to exploit the use of volumes to create this sense of generosity in space. Like, for instance, Hotel Icon, where the health club in the mid-air next to the swimming pool, 3 stories high, but the footprint is actually quite small. But because it's 3 stories high, it's surrounded by glass, so it feels very spacious. Similarly, in this building, I don't think there is any one space which is generous in terms of size, in terms of area. As even your main entrance is maybe just right. It's not grand, but it's high, because volume is a thing that used to come without too much cost. Okay, construction-wise, maybe. But there are ways to cool the space without cooling the upper part, for instance. And there are ways where environmental concerns like sound, acoustics, and could be handled without waste. Which is why in buildings, for instance, like Citibank Plaza in Central, we create this 13 stories central atria through space between 2 towers. The client doesn't need convincing. He knows that it actually is a advantage for the user experience. And frankly, in Hong Kong, if you have the land, the additional construction costs that related with an increased height in volumes is relatively insignificant. Now, the biggest challenge these days comes from government. Because it used to be that lobbies and things that are 2-3 stories high are fine, no longer. No longer. Even in your building, outside, we have to lower the ceiling in such a way and throw the ceiling above the ceiling with so much obstruction structure to prevent its use or prevent its misuse. Otherwise, you would still have a still higher ceiling because your lecture hall requires higher ceilings. And yours is not a profit-making building. In other commercial buildings these days, the restriction on heights or volumes of space is even more stringent. It's getting more stringent. So a lot of things that I've done in the past would no longer be able to be approved. And that's sad. So it's not convincing the client. It's about the government.
That's sad. Thank you so much.
Do we have any more questions? Yes.
Since there's a new
Mike is coming.
So since there's a new generation of architects entering the industry, how do you think we should blend the past and the future together in today's present day?
There is no one answer to your question, right? And that's the beauty of studying to be an architect. Each architect should have their own view on what to do. What I would like to caution is that you should understand the past first. You should understand it not as literal images. You should understand the essence of what makes certain elements of the past so valuable and deserving of being reused. You should find inspiration not just in certain aspects of the past, not just objects or built forms. You should find it in the spirit, in the outlook, in your attitude to life, or in their attitude to life. You should understand, for instance, how in the past people already know how to exist in harmony with nature, and how as a modern being you work towards that in a different way. So you really should try many directions of thinking about the past and deciding on what's worth using or evolving it to incorporate into our future. It's a matter of the attitude. It's not a matter of, rigid directions on forms and colors and shapes.
Thank you so much.
All right. If no other questions, thank you again for Dr. Yim to bring in us such a. Oh, okay. Well, okay. Last one.
Why? I'm sorry to ask such silly question, but how would you feel about the critics and the bad rumors about your building, and would those emotions reflect to your next project?
Again?
How would you feel about the critics and the bad rumors about your building, and would those emotions reflect to your next project?
Critics of?
How to handle criticism on your plans?
Sorry, he's a year one student, so a little bit more straightforward.
Both of them were year one.
Well, I think like everybody else, if there are silly critics or silly comments, I tend to get angry and upset. Especially comments that you can't really debate on, right? How should I put it? 無厘頭, you know what is 無厘頭? Yeah, 無厘頭 things that's. However, sometimes there are criticisms that you could easily find a logic to refute. And if I find that logic and understands why that comment is wrong, then I would feel very happy. I don't necessarily have to go and tell him or her, but I would be happy because I would tell myself that I've actually thought about this. But obviously, the critic hasn't. I'll give you one example. There's one critic. I won't say who. He said, or he or she, about the Palace Museum, right?
Oh, okay.
He said the Palace Museum is the wrong feng shui. Because every building in China faces south, the main door. And the Palace Museum in Beijing naturally faces south, right? So our museum faces east. Now I thought about that, and I thought that was a irrelevant criticism. Why? Because I've said that buildings, in order to be of sustainable value, has to be tied to its place, right? This is Hong Kong, this is not Beijing. In Beijing, the sun is always on the south. So always better to have the building or the entrance towards the south. That's one reason, I think. In Hong Kong, actually, for half of the year, if you face south, you don't have the sun. The sun will be towards the north. So for half a year, the entrance will always be in shadow. Now maybe that's good, I don't know. But that's no reason why in Hong Kong the entrance should face south. But if the building faces east, then for every day, half a day, it will have the sun. And for the other half, it will be in shadow. Wouldn't that be better? Maybe not, I don't know, but at least I have a reason for doing it. Of course, the other reason, of course, is that I have to respect the master plan. Because the master plan towards the south of the building is already a park. You don't want to disturb the park. Already it's small. It's really tiny, full of people. You don't want to disturb the park, create an entrance towards the park, and create spaces for people to queue and gather and all that. It doesn't make sense. So that sort of criticism doesn't bother me. In fact, it makes me happy. Because I thought, oh, I have thought about everything, yet he hasn't, or he or she hasn't.
All right. Thank you all for joining us, and special thanks for Dr. Yim for providing the speech today. Thank you.